All right. Just going to share my screen. I'm going to set it up. Can everybody see that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. This is we might need we'll need our Bibles for this one. It's kind of like a Bible study as well. It's about the Great Week. We'll talk a bit more about what this means, the Great Week, but it could also be called the Day of the Lord. Maybe before we start, how long do you usually go on for, Pastor Anthony? To what time?
Usually half an hour, 35 minutes, that kind of thing.
Okay,
Is
yeah.
that enough? Is that enough for you?
I'll just cut off whenever, like, because I probably won't be able to get through it all in one go.
You can
Uh,
do, we can allow two parts if you want. You can do a
but
second.
it's just that I can find a good place to wind
Pause.
off and close.
Okay.
So we'll just moving on. It just talks about the principle, which is what we call a year or a day for 1,000 years. Just reading from 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8, it says, "But beloved, be not ignorant. This one thing, that one day is with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day." And also, in a similar way, in the book of Psalms, chapter 90 and verse 4, it says, "For 1,000 years in thy sight, but as yesterday when it is past." So same kind of reference, and as a watch in the night. So from that principle, you have one day equals 1,000 years. And from that, 7 days would make 7,000 years. And from that, you can conclude that 7 days is like one big week. Is the size of the font big enough for everybody to see? Yeah. Okay, good. And what I've done here is just it's a time frame. You don't need to worry about all the little numbers, but it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and each grey block represents 1,000 years. So we start in the beginning, which is minus 4,000. We usually use the event of Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden, which sort of represents man history. 4,000 years up to the birth of Jesus, which is even today, it's still referred to as the year zero. And then first 1,000 years, second 1,000 years, we're into the you could call it the third millennial already, the third millennium, and the first century of the third millennium. So we're about here, and so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it's not a coincidence that the Lord uses this time frame and limits it to 7, and it's tied into creation. It's tied into the way the week is divided and the days are divided, and etc. And so what we're going to compare is maybe not tonight, but we'll see how the words that Jesus spoke of in the parables, actually, it's not just about a story. It's not about a moral. It's actually a man's history, and this 7,000-year period, which is compacted into a few sentences. And we're just reading from Matthew 13, verse 35. The Lord says, "I will open my mouth in parables, and I will utter things which have been kept secret from the foundation of the world." So as we also know in the New Testament, in the epistles, it talks a lot about the mystery which has been revealed to us. And the mystery is, of course, the plan of God for mankind, the kingdom of heaven, which the Jews and people of the Old Testament didn't really, they had a glimpse of it. They had an idea of maybe even eternity, but they didn't really know how it was going to work. There was prophecies, but they knew Messiah was coming, but they didn't really know what was going to happen. And when the Lord talks in parables, the Lord says it's like a code. I'm going to tell you things through these parables, which are going to reveal to you and going to explain to you the whole plan of God. And so this is a good way of looking at those parables is when you overlap them with the Great Week and the 7,000 year period. A lot of them actually just fall into place, but you've actually got to decode them. You've got to decode the parable. And that's where you see particularly the Bible. You look at the Bible, and it's kind of like an exercise in one of those things where you can show to people and say, well, there's something big here. There's something bigger than what maybe a book about morals or a code would have. It's really designed, and it's got a code. It's got different layers of interpretation and different layers of reading it. And parables is one way, which we're looking at now. And we're just going to be reading and read the whole parable of Matthew 13, which is the parable of the wheat and the tares, because that's really an entry to, it sort of opens the door of reading the parables this way. And we'll see why. Matthew 13. So I thought it'd be easier if we just read it all together from the scriptures than having it on screen. So I'll just read from verse 24. But in those days, after the tribulation, Matthew. Oops, I was in Mark. Matthew 13. Verse 24. Another parable put he forth unto them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is likened unto a man which sowed good seed in his field. But while man slept, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat, and then went his way. But when the blade was sprung up and brought forth fruit, appeared the tares also. So the servants of the householder came and said unto him, Sir, didst not thou sow good seed in the field? From whence then has it tares? He said unto them, an enemy hath done this. The servant said unto him, wilt thou then that we go and gather them up? But he said, nay, lest while ye gather up the tares, you root up also the wheat with them. They both grow together until the harvest, and in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, gather ye together the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. And what's interesting here is this parable is the only one that actually or one of the only places where the Lord explains the meanings of everything in the parable. So it's a bit like a point of reference for the Lord saying, this is the code I'm using, and I'll give you a few, I'll give you what the vocabulary which I'm using it actually means spiritually. So when you read the other ones, you'll be able to do the job yourself. So this is what we're going to be looking at, parable of the wheat and the tares. So that's what the explanation is, actually starts in verse 36. And it's actually in verse 35 where there is that verse where he says, well, the parables that I'm talking to you, they're actually talking about the whole plan of God for the whole of mankind. And nobody has known this before, but now I'm going to explain it to you, but I'm going to do it in a parable, in a code. And so in verse 35, that's what he says. And then verse 36, he then explains the meaning. And he sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. So they'd already heard it, but they said, Declare it, please explain it to us. We want to know what it means. And he answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, but the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. So in just a very few verses, again, very simple way of explaining it. This means this. So what we're going to go through is he starts by saying, he that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. So what we can do with the parables is we can, he talks about the tares are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. And then he says the harvest is the end of the world. We're just going to focus on these 3 points. And so we're going to place them on this time frame. So the sower is Jesus. Then the tares are the devil. As we can also overlap this with many things. It's like Jesus came, he brought the word, and then quite early on in history, maybe hundreds of years later, there was the Roman Empire overtook, brought in Christianity as we know it, the mainstream Christianity as we know it today, the false Christianity with the Catholic Church, and sowed tares in the world, and they grew together. So Jesus came, then the devil came, and as we know today, we live in a world where there's mostly tares than wheat growing. And then it jumps all the way to the harvest is the end of the world. So this one really doesn't put any particular time, but it just gives the principle that the parables can be overlapped with this history, with this way of looking at it. So what we're going to do maybe tonight, we'll just look at the principle that of what does a week represent for the Lord? Well, what's this time frame? And to do that, we have to go to look at the Sabbath. As we know, on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. That's in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 2. If maybe I'm going too fast, or if anybody's wants to check something, please raise your hand or whatever. I don't want to go rush ahead of everyone. It's good so far? Yep. Okay. I think most people have been the Lord for a while, so that helps as well. And on the seventh day, so we're just reading the verse again, and we're going to apply the principle of fragmenting each part and applying it to this time period. So it says that he rested on the seventh day. So the seventh day is the time of rest. If there's one thing to remember, is that the Sabbath day is the time of rest. So over the great week, the last 7,000 years of man's time is the time of rest for man, which is the Sabbath, which is what we know, of course, is the 1,000 years where Jesus will rule and reign and look after the earth. And that is a fundamental principle, and it's so well balanced and threaded out the Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation about the day of the Lord, the time of rest, the Sabbath, the return of the Lord. It's all it's just another layer of saying the same thing, but through a timeline if we want. But it's just very consistent, and it's also something which is very for us unconceivable that any person could have written a book like this and overlapped it with history in the future. And it says that he rested from all his work. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the Lord worked for 6 days and he rested. So that's another principle. Work for 6 days, rest on the seventh day. We find this again many times in Exodus 31 verse 17. It's a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. So if we're thinking spiritually, this Sabbath, this principle of the great week, it's a sign for us. It's a sign for the spiritual Israel that's going to be forever. So we can take comfort in these things, that knowing that we're waiting for the Lord to return. The time of rest is coming. And so in 6 days, the Lord made heaven and earth, work, time of work, and read. And on the 7th day, he rested and was refreshed. That's the time of rest. That's the principle that we have. And another one from Exodus chapter 20 and verse 9 to 10. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath day of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy maidservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within the gates. And we can apply all this to when the Lord returns. He's going to be the one ruling. And there's references like in Zechariah that talks about how when he will return during the 1,000 years, there will be the Feast of the Tabernacles reinstored, and the nations will have to come and worship him. And so it's not going to be a time for mankind to rule and to work like it is now in power. It's going to be the Lord which will do that. And those who will not comply to that, it says that they will have the following punishments. So here it's this kind of way saying that during the 1,000 years, the last day, it's not up to man to work, otherwise he'll be put to death, meaning it's not going to work. So again, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. So this is time of man's work on earth. And here it's making a distinction. In the beginning, there was the principle of the Lord did all the work and he rested. Now it's man is working. Man's time on this earth is 6 days, and 6 is also the number of man. We know 7 is also the number of God. And in an image, when we are born again, we go from number 6 to number 7. And when the Lord will return, we'll go from the 6th day to the 7th day, again, being the day of the Lord. So we're going to work, man is going to work on earth for 6 days, and then the Lord will take over. And as we read here, but the 7th day is the Sabbath day of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. So that's the time of rest. That's God's kingdom. Everybody with me still so far? Yeah. This is quite simple if you've already heard about it already. Just cross-referencing with other things, other scriptures. Genesis 3 verse 23, therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden. And that's also the reason why we use 4,000 years before to start with the time frame, is because it's when God sent man from the Garden of Eden to till the ground, to start the work, to go out into the world and be his own master as well, in a way. And so that's the start of man's work. Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. And that's also historically, people say that that's when the agricultural revolution would have started. People actually tilling the ground like Cain would have done, would have known how to do. As he worked on the ground, his brother looked after the sheep. In Leviticus, this is maybe one we can read together, chapter 25. So I really like this because you can really, when you look at it, this angle, it takes a whole different meaning. Leviticus chapter 25 and verse 2 to 7. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when you come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. Here it's not days, but it's years. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and in 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard. Now remember that when the Lord explained that parable, he said that the earth was the ground. I mean, it's the people, it's mankind. And so it's really a strong reference here and a strong link that 6 years man shall be on the earth, and he shall work the ground. And the ground, you work it because you sow things. And as the Lord said to Cain, was it Cain or was it? I think it was Adam. He said, "You'll work for the land, but you'll gather briars and thorns," and that represents also man's hardships. They sow a lot of things, but they just reap not nice things, briars and thorns. And it's we see that today. It's a thorny world because of what man's sowing in the ground. So again, verse 3, 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, so unto the land which is the whole earth, and a Sabbath for the Lord. And thou shalt neither sow thy field nor prune thy vineyard. So again, it's saying that man will no longer be the one working during this time, that they will be at rest. And this is quoting from Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 3, and it shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give thee rest. Another reference to the day of the Lord, which is the time of rest in green, the kingdom of God. He will give thee rest from thy sorrow and from thy fear and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve. So we can call this sin, we can call this the as it says in the book of Revelation, that the curse and also the bondage, just the hard labor of living on earth without really reaping anything. Of course, spiritually, we can reap things that will, we can reap things from the tears, which is the word of God. Sorry, I got this mixed up. We can reap things from the wheat, but the world only reaps tears. So thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, which is spiritually the devil, and say, how hath the oppressor ceased? So the time of labor is finished. The golden city ceased. And as we know, during the 1,000 years, the devil is locked up. So it's really a time of rest. It's really a time of peace. And verse 7, it says the whole earth is at rest. So when the devil is locked up, which is also referring to the day of the Lord, the 7,000, the 7th millennium. The earth is at rest and is quiet, and they break forth into singing. So good moments to be looking forward to. We'll be we've got a special place. We'll be spiritual. We won't be on earth like everybody else. Again, Exodus chapter 31, verses 15 to 16. 6 days may work be done, but in the 7th is the Sabbath rest, holy to the Lord. Whosoever doth any work on the Sabbath day shall surely be put to death. Again, it comes back. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. Now, this is also a spiritual promise. We're the spiritual Israel, and we're going to be keeping that Sabbath for the rest, that time of rest. It's promised to us forever, not just on a once a week or once every 50 years or every 49 years or 7 years. And it's a perpetual covenant, and that's what the promise to the Lord, it's a sign between me and thee. And it says in Matthew 12, verse 8, it's a story where Jesus is, it's one of the story where the Pharisees tries to trick Jesus, and they ask him, well, how come your disciples are doing things on the Sabbath day? And how come you're healing people? And his answer, he says, for the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath day. So that's again a strong reference saying that during this time of rest, of this great week, of this time, 1,000-year period, the Son of Man, Jesus, he is still the Lord, and he's going to be the one doing the work. So it's completely normal, but everybody else is going to rest. So that's what we call the day of the Lord. It comes up quite a few times in the scriptures. Just this term, the day of the Lord, is referenced 31 times in the Bible, and then there are different terms for it. Sometimes it's called the day of wrath, or the day of that terrible day, or just, it's got different terms. But so all in all, it's probably mentioned over 50 times, and we're all aware of this. This is just showing how from the beginning to the end, it's all laid out, and it's all there. Revelation 22 and verse 16 says, I, Jesus, have sent mine angel to testify unto you these things in the churches. And it says, I am the root and the offspring of David, and the bright and morning star. Now, if we think of the day starts when the sun rises, and Jesus says, I'm the morning star. So it's a reference to when the Lord returns, this seventh day, great day, 1,000-year period. It doesn't necessarily mean that it starts at midnight. The day doesn't start at midnight. It starts, and as we know, the Lord hasn't returned. We're in 2023. The Lord will return. It's not trying to pinpoint when the Lord will return, but it's just to say that the day will start when he returns. And it's not by coincidence that when Jesus appeared to the apostles, it was often in the morning at daybreak, like when they went back fishing. It said they fished all night, and then he appeared in the morning. And also when he prepared the supper for them, which was actually in the morning, said, come and eat, everything's ready. And a few times as well, he appeared to them in the morning, which is another reference saying it's an image. It's like a prophecy saying that when the Lord returns, it's going to be the morning of the seventh day, as the day breaks, as we call it, because he's the morning star. So it all kind of fits into this great timeline. We'll skip over this. We've got a few minutes left. We'll just quickly look at this parable, because this is one of the few that really fits in well, and it talks about it's very precise in how it works. And it's Le Good Samaritan, because hey, from France. So it's in Luke 10 and verse 30 to 35. What we'll do, for the sake of time, we won't read the whole thing together, but we'll just go on to the next slides, which will also cover the whole verses and the whole parable. It says in verse 30 that Jesus answered, said, a certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and fell amongst thieves, which stripped him of his raiment, and wounded him, and departed, leaving him half dead. More or less, this can be considered as man being left for dead before the law. Like you can think of Israel being enslaved in Egypt. They were left dead as a nation, as a country. And then the Lord, he sent them priests. He put in a priesthood. But unfortunately, as it says in verse 31 and 32, by chance there came down a certain priest that way, and he saw him, and he passed on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. And as we know, the priesthood and the Levites and the kings didn't look after Israel very well. They left, the people did, pretty much. When Jesus comes into the picture, we've just got the scribes, the Pharisees, the Levites, and they're completely cut off from the rest of the people. They're just doing their own thing, and they're using the laws for their own gains. So he's also targeting them at this time. So the priests and the Levites didn't help for, we can say, all this time. But it says a certain Samaritan, which is, of course, Jesus, as he journeyed, he wasn't from here. He was from heaven. He came and he left. But as he journeyed, he came where he was. And when he saw him, he had compassion on him. So having compassion on the sinful man and mankind itself. And he went to him and bound up his wounds. In the book of Isaiah, it talks how from head to toe, man is covered in sores. And more references to the New Testament, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. So at this point, we can know that before this, it was the man. And from this point on, Jesus comes. And he says, and on the morrow when he departed, so again, not at midnight, but a little bit when the day starts, sort of, he departed the next day. So the fifth day, or the next millennium, he took out 2 pence and gave them to the host and said unto him, take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. So what we're looking at tonight is the host could be the church. And it covers 2,000 years. Why 2,000 years? Because it says he gave him 2 pence. And the average daily wage at the time was 1 pence a day, 1 penny a day. We've got that in other parables as well. So he in advance, he said, just look after him for 2 days and then I'll come back. So here we have something that really fits in with the Great Week principle. And actually, Brother Philip, it was Pastor Ron who shared this parable with us this way a long time ago about the 2 pence. And I just thought about it many years later and put it into this way. But it just fits in really nicely with the Great Week in this timeline. Because then he says, when I come again, I will repay thee. And he does say, I don't know how precise we want to go into, but maybe we shouldn't. It says, whatsoever they'll spend this more, saying maybe, well, I'm going to tarry a little bit, or it might be long. And we do have in the scriptures saying, don't fall asleep, just keep waiting for the Lord, he's coming back. But it does say when the Lord returns, he'll repay thee. And we know that if we're looking after the people, we're looking after the church, we're looking after the men who, like what we were, who were left for dead in sin, and now they've come to the Lord and part of the church. Well, the Lord promises us a reward. And there are other parables that go into that as well, and maybe next time we can look into that. But I hope it's not too much at the same time. If it is anyway, I can send you the documents and you can have a look at it quietly and with more time. But that's just sort of like an introduction to it. And I think I've got all in all maybe 10 or so parables that overlap this way. So we'll maybe, if Pastor Anthony said that was okay to come in another time, we can go through a few more, and it might be easier to jump in, having already done this. So that's it. Thank you.
Good stuff. Thanks a million. Thanks, I'll just stop the record.